Hi there. My name is Stevie Corder, and I decided to do my informational interpreting interview with Jessica Swygart. I picked Jessica because she was my ASL instructor during high school for ASL 1, 2, and 3. She interpreted from 2006 to 2010, and she is still an ASL instructor for Eagle High School. She currently lives in Middleton, Idaho. So one of my main focuses for interviewing Jessica was the fact that it has been quite a few years since she has interpreted. So I would like to look at the then and the now. So during the time of her interpreting, again, 2006 to 2010, she was not required to have a bachelor's degree or any sort of certification at the time. Um, she was hired based on her experience alone. But now a bachelor's degree is required as well as other certifications to be an interpreter. She interpreted for two boys specifically in the Middleton School District. One boy was autistic and there was another who was just special needs. This affected her interpreting experience drastically because it wasn't a traditional interpreting setting. She had to make adjustments based on her interactions with these boys because of their special needs. She told me that one boy didn't pay attention because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. He was really embarrassed, and the other boy, he didn't pay attention because he didn't want to. This one was the autistic boy, and he would look away or look down, and Jessica spent a lot of her time trying to get him to pay attention. So during interpreting, it's important to keep your hands healthy. I asked her if she ever tried the hot wax method, and she didn't even know it was a thing. So it made me curious if that was something that was a newer practice. She did tell me that she used lotion and massaged her own hands. She didn't really know why, but lotion helped for some reason. And she definitely warmed her hands up every day. She did struggle on colder days. It was like her finger swelling would lock up, but she somehow managed to get through, and being inside was nice. Another thing about interpreting in an educational setting was that there was a lot of downtime. So she would get to interpret and then take a break, and that gave her the breaks that she needed throughout the day to keep her hands healthy. So she did mention a couple downsides to interpreting. She had a lot of neck pain based on her shoulder positioning. Her doctors told her that she kept her shoulders up near her ears and wouldn't relax and let things go. So she held everything in her neck and shoulder area, and she really just needed to relax and put her shoulders back instead of up. But she said that was the only health issue she ever experienced related to interpreting. So sometimes she was an advocate and sometimes she was a teacher. One thing that surprised me was she talked about a divorce that went on between the parents of one of her kids that she interpreted for. They were getting a divorce, but they did not let him know that they were getting a divorce, which is actually pretty heartbreaking. They said he wouldn't understand and he wouldn't get it, but he was making comments such as, "My dad's not coming home at night," or "My dad is sleeping in the trailer." So he knew a couple of things were going on that were out of the ordinary. And eventually Jessica had to meet with the parents and say, "Look, he knows what's going on or has an idea and you need to tell him." And at that point, she felt that she was being an advocate for him because he had been acting out behaviorally. And eventually the parents did tell him about the divorce, and he was fine after that. Sometimes she would interpret in a special needs classroom and then in a regular classroom. In the special needs room, she usually would interpret for whoever the overall teacher was, and then she would sit down with her students and walk them through their worksheets or the homework that they had. So she also acted as a teacher in that sense. In a regular classroom, she was mainly just an interpreter, and usually she was in a regular classroom with the boy that would tend to avoid drawing attention to himself, and he actually had her sit in the corner because he didn't want her to really be recognized. He looked at her whenever he wanted to. And this same boy had cochlear implants, and she had to be an advocate for him at one point because he kept taking them out and putting them in his pockets, and his parents weren't happy about that. But if you listen to a couple videos about what it sounds like when you have cochlear implants in, it's not even muffled talking. It's just kind of like a staticky TV screen. So it was so much background noise for him that he was overwhelmed. So she had to be an advocate in this case to inform the parents. This is why he's taking them out. It's not to be defiant or rude. It's just really bothering him. Another thing that she kind of had to be a teacher for was both students really did not know ASL, and that was because they were raised in hearing families. Their families didn't know sign language either. Oftentimes their parents just didn't communicate with them that way. The only time that they used sign language was when Jessica was their interpreter. So she did teach them a lot, but her skills never really went above that ASL 1 level. Constantly, it was a lot of PSE and going between that and ASL, but mainly just trying to make sure that they understand what's going on in a language that they can recognize, which wasn't always ASL. So to dive a little bit deeper into then versus now, the first thing I would like to focus on is the one-on-one contact. Oftentimes Jessica would meet specifically with the parents without any principal or higher up there, and they often had a notebook that they just used to communicate back and forth what happened at school, what happened at home. Usually there was no intervention from other teachers or instructors or, again, the principal, and just to focus on the fact that there was a lot of communication barriers. Oftentimes the parents didn't share the same language as their child, and another one of those communication forms besides writing back and forth in the journal is they would write back and forth to their child or try to make them understand lip reading. So I would like to focus on how it relates to the text. So practices for healthy hands, that is something that we definitely focused on this semester. It is important to keep those flexible so that you don't develop problems later in life. And also we talked about neck pain and how interpreting can kind of be held in the shoulders and in the neck. So it is really important that you make sure to loosen up and maybe even see a chiropractor regularly. And another thing that we talked about that is a little bit deeper into the text is interpreting boundaries. And that kind of refers to, am I an advocate or a teacher in this situation? And how would the deaf consumer like me to interpret, like me to behave? Do you ask personal questions? Do you not? And it's just kind of reading the situation, determining how how it feels. You feel out the situation, feel out the person you're interpreting for. Some situations are formal and some are very informal as well. Overall, I learned a lot from Jessica. Even though she was my instructor in high school, we really never had these conversations. So I did learn that a lot of things from the text apply to real life, and that although it was several years ago that she was an interpreter, these rules and vocabulary still apply then and today, and that was a really big focus for me. I really enjoyed interviewing Jessica and learned a lot about her experience as an interpreter.